All right, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. It's now time for my EUIC tier list video. Today I'm going to be ranking what I think are the best decks to play to EUIC this weekend, where all the decks in the meta right now kind of stand heading into the largest tournament of the year so far. And we've had a decent look at what the metagame might be like thanks to some meta shifts at Merida. So I'm definitely excited to compete this weekend. I'm going to be at EUIC, and it's my first time in London, so I'm pretty excited to go to England for the first time and stuff. I'm pretty excited to compete this weekend. I'm kind of locking in a couple decks right now, and I'm excited to talk about what I think are the best decks for the tournament, where decks are right now in the meta, and maybe some like sleeper decks, like some decks legit could be sleeper picks right now in the format. So I'm definitely excited to talk about all that in today's video. I'll leave a link to the tier list down below if you want to go try it for yourself, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 21,000 subs here, and let me know if I over under ranked a deck. Let me know what you think of the tier list down below and where you would rank some of these decks. So starting off, we have Dragapult. We have 3 different Pulp variants right now that are seeing play. The main one is obviously the Budu Dusknoir build, which is, in my opinion, one of the best decks in the format right now, if not the best deck in the format. I don't know if there's actually an S tier deck. Like, to say there would be an S tier deck, the deck would have to, like, warp the entire game around it. I know Dragapult is really good. I don't know if I would call it S tier, but it definitely is BDIF. Like, at least it's high above. Like, it's probably like A++ tier, not quite S tier, I guess. I don't know if that makes any sense. But anyways, the point is, Dragapult is really good right now, and it's probably still going to be the best deck for EUIC, and still most likely the most popular deck at the tournament, because even though it didn't do as well at Merida, it actually doesn't even have that bad of a Miraidon matchup, and it's still a decent deck at beating almost anything. It really only has like maybe like one matchup that's like a little shaky. Other than that, I mean, it can beat anything. It's one of the top decks right now. And I mean, we already have like a pretty solid list thanks to the Brent Tonneson and Inkus list we saw at Merida. I think we have a good 58 cards, 59 cards for a good Dragapult 60. And yeah, I mean, while the deck didn't do as well in Merida as it could have been, like it could have won the tournament, it still made top 8. And I think it's still like the best deck in the format. And I don't know, if I'm going to this tournament, I am not taking a bad matchup into Dragapult. I think it's still going to be extremely popular and definitely in the BDIF tier for sure. It's definitely the top deck for the tournament. But then we have the other 2 Dragapult variants. We have Pulsard and Dragapult Iron Thorns. Honestly, I haven't put much time into Pulsard, which maybe I should. I mean, I've had a lot of success with the deck in the past, but I'm not a big fan of the deck. I mean, it's fine, I guess. The Charizard does offset some of your more awkward matchups against the bigger turbo decks, like the Raging Bolts and the Miraidons and the Archaludons. But the deck feels like it's a worse version of the Budu build. Like, I mean, at that point, just play Budu, Dusknoir, Dragapult. I'm going to put in B tier, though. Like, I don't think it's a terrible deck. I think Charizard, as a card itself, is really good for the EUIC meta. It's just Charizard struggles into Dragapult. To me, my issue with this deck is it feels like it's probably weaker into the mirror match, which is a big issue. Like, you're going to struggle a lot into the Budu Dusknoir build, which is going to be the more common way to play the deck this weekend, right? So that's why I don't think Pulsard is, like, the best deck ever. It's just, I feel like at that point, just play Budu, Dusknoir, Dragapult, right? Like, the Charizard is nice, and it can fix some of your awkward matchups, but I still don't think it's, like, as good, and you're just weaker into the mirror. That's kind of the same thing I have with Dragapult Thorns, which, is, honestly, I gotta put it in C tier. I think that it has an even worse matchup into the Dragapult Budu mirror match. One of the benefits of playing this deck would probably be that it had a better Lugia matchup than the other Dragapult variants, but Lugia might not even be as popular as it could have been because of how good Miraidon did at Merida. So, I mean, one of the benefits of the deck is like, okay, it probably beats up on Lugia, but now Lugia's might not even be even that popular anymore. So, Dragapult Thorns, I would probably place in C tier. It also, in my opinion, isn't very good into Gardevoir, which is like the other deck you have to beat. It's not a terrible deck. It's like decent. You know, you're trying to cheese wins via Iron Thorns as opposed to using Budu to start with, but, you know, you're not playing Dusknoir. The deck isn't, like, bad or anything. You're a little bit more relying on, like, that Precious Trolley, so you could easily get cheesed out early on by, like, a Budu in the mirror. Like I said, it feels like this deck has a weaker mirror match than the Charizard Dragapult build of Dragapult, so you're probably going to struggle more into the more common Dragapult deck, and I just think this deck is, like, perfectly just fine. It's very mid. I think C tier is fine for Dragapult Iron Thorns. Like, it's not the greatest deck, and I also don't think it's very good into, like, Gardevoir either, or normal Dragapult, right? And that's just the thing that holds it back. I would say, though, it's probably better into Miraidon and then the other Dragapult variants, because you can, if you start Iron Thorns, or if you play Klefki in the deck too, you can slow down the Miraidon, which can probably give you an easy route. So you're probably a bit more favored into Miraidon and Lugia, but, I mean, going to this tournament, I think at that, you'd probably want to more focus on the Dragapult mirror match, and then also Gardevoir being the 2 big decks this weekend. So, I don't know. Next up is Regidrago. Honestly, C tier might be a decent place for it too. I mean, Drago definitely has fallen from grace, but it just feels really bad against Budu. Also, Gardevoir, like, I mean, Gardevoir maybe isn't even that bad of a matchup, depending on how the Guardy list is built. But I don't know about Drago anymore. I think Drago's time in the spotlight has faded. It's still not a bad deck, but it's kind of just like suffering from Dragapult's weaknesses already. So it's like all these other decks like Raging Bull, Miraidon, Archaludon that are probably going to be a little bit more popular this weekend at UIC already beat Regidrago. So now you're taking a lot of Dragapult's weaknesses. You are a stronger deck in theory, but you're weaker into Dragapult itself. Like you got Budu, you can't play E-Switch. I will say though, usually if Drago can set up a pretty good board against Dragapult without worrying about Budu, the deck probably does beat Dragapult. But Budu's a bit of a problem for the deck, and I don't know. Drago just doesn't feel like it's the best deck anymore. Also, one of its best matchups, like Charizard, is no longer in the format. The one benefit of playing Drago, though, is Lost Box is actually a pretty well-positioned deck right now, and we'll talk about that very soon. So, I mean, if you're somebody who expects to hit a lot of Lost Box, maybe you should play Regidrago, but I think Drago is in the C tier. Honestly, probably high. Honestly, maybe even top of C tier. Maybe, yeah, high C tier is probably a good place to put Regidrago, but I don't know. It just feels like it's just not a good time to play the deck anymore. It just feels very mediocre. Yeah, it's like, it's a good deck, but it picks up a lot of its weaknesses from Budu, and like also having a lot of Dragapult EX is already bad matchups that it's going to take to, and those decks might be popular because Dragapult. So it's kind of caught in the crossfire. All right, Charizard Pidgeot is also C tier. I mean, both these two decks from last format have completely fallen off a cliff. Like they are both pretty mediocre right now for sure. Regidrago's still decent, but Charizard definitely feels pretty bad right now. I think Charizard is still like a decent card in this meta. Like in theory, right? It's good into Miraidon. You're decent into Gardevoir in theory. If all these like big turbo decks are going to get more popular, Charizard gets even better. The problem with Charizard though is that it has an abysmal Dragapult matchup. Even with like these different variants we've seen, like with the Dunsparce, or even if you're trying to incorporate Team Evo into the deck or Grand Tree, I still don't think Charizard beats Dragapult most of the time. I feel like Max Belt's still the best A-spec for the deck, but I think Charizard definitely is very underwhelming right now. If you're going to play Charizard, it's kind of like playing Lost Box in the last format. You're playing a deck that has a bad matchup against the best and most popular deck in the room, but you're taking a good matchup against almost anything else in theory. It's a very risky play. It reminds me a lot of just playing Lost Box, right? Though to be fair, Charizard is a lot more consistent than Lost Box and technically stronger. So we'll have to see if Charizard can recover from being in the C tier post EUIC as we go to Vancouver, which is the next regional. So we'll have to see where Charizard goes after EUIC. But going into this tournament, it's definitely a deck I'm not really looking at anymore. It's just like, it just feels bad when you have a bad Dragapult matchup and it's the most popular deck in the room. It just doesn't feel very good. It's like playing Lost Box last format. You can build the Charizard list to counteract Dragapult, like I said, but it's still just not a good matchup in general. All right, Archaludon, pretty good deck. A tier is maybe a little too nice, but I think Archaludon is an A-tier deck. Archaludon has a good matchup against Dragapult, in my opinion, and a pretty good matchup against Miraidon, which are two decks that are going to be pretty popular this weekend. Archaludon's good. It's just a very straightforward, strong deck. I think Dialga is still going to be the more common way it's going to see play, but we'll see if like the straightforward Archaludon deck with no Dialga is good. I think both variants are fine. Dialga does give you a better matchup into Snorlax, per se, and maybe a little bit of a better matchup in a Gardevoir, theoretically, over the no Dialga version of Archaludon, but Archaludon seems like an A-tier deck. I mean, a lot of people are probably going to talk about it for EUIC. It's a very like easy, straightforward deck to pilot, where I feel like, well, it's not easy, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very strong and powerful deck that I think its stocks are going to go way up just because we saw stuff like Miraidon do well, especially if people are going to build the Azul list of Miraidon and play no Zapdos. You're even more favoring Miraidon. No, to be fair, if Miraidon plays Zapdos, the matchup is a bit closer because then they can amp your Duraludons and then initiate the 2/2/2 race very easily. But then you force them to get 4 energy on Iron Hands turn 1, so you force them out of the Miraidon deck. But, I mean, I don't know, man. Miraidon seems pretty good. So, Archaludon, I think it's an A-tier deck right now. It's one of the more solid top decks right now that's not in BDIF status. Raging Bolt is next. I think A-tier is also... is A-tier too kind? I don't know, man. Raging Bolt seems like it's pretty good this weekend, no? Like, it beats Dragapult. That's really good. You're beating the best deck in the format. You're not bad into Miraidon. That's another good one. Obviously, the one downside about playing Raging Bolt is you have a really bad matchup against Gardevoir, or at the very least, your matchup is not great on paper. However, though, Gardevoir hasn't been playing Drifloon Bravery Charm. So if people are going to be playing that Michael Davidson build without the Bravery Charm Drifloon, Raging Bolt actually gets even better for this tournament. So I don't know. Raging Bull actually seems like a pretty well-positioned deck this weekend. Again, it has a good Dragapult matchup. You're beating one of the top decks in the room. You can build your Raging Bolt deck to have answers to Gardevoir. Like, you can play a Vacuum or something in the deck if you want to make that matchup a little bit better. You can play Briar in the deck. You can definitely make a Raging Boltless beat Gardevoir. It's not unwinnable. Gardevoir can also have a slow setup. You can run them over. Raging Bolt, well, like, in theory, it's not the best deck in the room. I think that it's probably a little bit more well-positioned for EUIC than it has been before, just because it's favored into Miraidon and very favored into Dragapult. Out of all the decks, I feel like on this tier list, I actually think Raging Bolt has the best matchup against Dragapult, Budew, Dusknoir, in my opinion. It's a pretty strong deck. I guess your Archaludon matchup's like a little shaky because they can one-prize board state you, which is kind of annoying. And even if you try to like put a Bravery Charm on your Raging Bolt, obviously they can Duraludon on you for 30 and then evolve and knock you out, which is annoying. Then they have Jamming Tower, obviously, so it's not a great matchup. But Raging Bolt seems good. I mean, you're beating up on Dragapult, which feels pretty good, right? So there's that. Shempao, probably C tier, I guess. I don't know. It's like, is it a good deck? Maybe, maybe not. Honestly, no. It's probably D tier. I don't know. Like, Shempao feels kind of underwhelming right now. I don't know. Like, your rare candies get locked out by Budew. I don't feel like you're great into some of like Gardevoir's like maybe okay, I guess. I don't know. Like, well, you have a really bad Miraidon matchup. That's another problem with Shempao. Your Miraidon matchup sucks. So Shempao is probably D tier. It's just probably not the right time to play the deck right now. Next up is Cloth Terapagos. Pretty solid B tier deck. Pretty good deck. Pretty solid play. It doesn't. The problem. Okay, so the difference between being in B and A tier, I feel like in this tier list, is that the A tier decks are good into at least one or two of the decks in the BDIF status, where B tier, it's an all around solid deck, but you do have a bit more weaknesses than the other decks. Like, Cloth is like not ideal against Gardevoir. That's a pretty bad matchup. And also, I mean, your Dragapult matchup isn't bad, but I also don't think it's great. It's probably more Dragapult favored than anything, but Cloth does have the advantage of having a good Miraidon matchup, and Miraidon I do expect to be a lot more popular this weekend. You're better into some of the other A tier decks, like Cloth's pretty good into Raging Bolt. Archaludon's probably a little unfavored, but I think that Cloth's like a decent deck. I think B tier is a good place to put it. It's just kind of in the middle. It's a pretty good deck. Nothing crazy. Not really favored into some of the top decks in the BDIF status, but, the middle ground is a good place to put it, I feel like. Ancient Box is, I don't know, B or C. I'm wavering towards B and C. I'm going to put it in B tier for now. I actually think Ancient Box is not a bad pick for this weekend. You don't have a bad Gardevoir matchup, in my opinion, especially if they're not playing Drifloon anymore. Really, their only route to beating you is like using Screamtail against you, but they're not playing Bravery Charm. The way Guardy's being built right now, it's actually better for Ancient Box. I don't think your Dragapult matchup is bad. It might be slightly unfavored, but I think it's still a decent matchup. You can play Monkey Dory, which I advise putting in the deck. You can honestly just kind of net deck the one that got second place at the recent Champions League in Osaka, and you can probably make a couple changes to your liking. Also, Ancient Box isn't bad into Cloth. It doesn't seem very bad into Raging Bolt or Archaludon. You're just an all-around solid archetype that feels like it's a little bit slept on. My issues with the deck, and probably what holds it back from being higher on a tier list right now, and why I put it in like the middle ground, is that you are very inconsistent, and you don't have the world's greatest Dragapult matchup. Also, your Miraidon matchup is probably 50-50, because if they can amp you quickly and you can't respond to Iron Hands, it's not great, depending on how your board is. But yeah, Ancient Box seems like a B tier deck. It's honestly not a bad deck for this weekend. Like, it actually feels like it isn't bad. It's not a bad position, is all I'm trying to say. Lost Box is another deck I would maybe consider putting in A tier. This is definitely a bit of an interesting one, but it kind of depends on what's popular right now. Well, for starters, Dragapult not playing Manaphy is a good thing for Lost Box. I mean, you have a great Dragapult matchup, in my opinion. Also, your matchup into Gardevoir isn't bad. Now, it really depends on how the Guardy list is being built. If they're playing Manaphy and Fluttermane, it's not ideal for you. If they're playing Budew, Klefki, Fluttermane, it's really not ideal for you. Depending on how the Guardy lists are being built, I think Lost Box is a lot more favored into Gardevoir right now. I think Lost Box genuinely could be it might be a sleeper pick for this tournament. I feel like there's no hype for the deck right now, and it actually doesn't seem like a bad play for this tournament. The other nice thing about playing Lost Box is there's like literally no one playing Regidrago right now. I do not expect Drago to be popular in the slightest at EUIC. So unless you're in like a weird bracket, there's a good chance you can go through the entire tournament without seeing a single Regidrago V being flipped over, which is really good for Lost Box. So Lost Box seems pretty good. It's not bad into Lugia. It's not bad in Dragapult. You have a great Archaludon matchup if you're playing the Pikachu deck. Raging Bolt's a great matchup. Miraidon's probably your weakest matchup out of the top decks right now, just because Miraidon usually can initiate the 2-prize race quicker than you can. Even with Pikachu and Bear, it's actually really tough when they can just like constantly spam amp you very much. Also, yeah, your Cloth matchup isn't bad either. That's another thing. You have a decent matchup in a Cloth Tropicos and stuff, and your Gouging Fire matchup's pretty good too. And it's got actually a lot of really good matchups, kind of like Ancient Box. I think it's a better deck than Ancient Box as like a 1-prizey type deck. It definitely feels like a very solid deck right now. I actually rate Lost Box pretty highly at the moment for sure. Lost Tina is interesting. C tier or B tier is like an okay place to put it, I guess. It just feels like Lost Box is probably just a better deck, but Tina's not bad. C tier is like probably a fine place to put Giratina. It's like an okay deck. Just kind of, it's average, middle of the road. Does have a lot of weaknesses though, and there's better decks above it, which is what holds it back. Next up is Sablezard. This is a weird one. Actually, technically Sablezard isn't even that bad. This is weird. I don't know. I'm somebody who likes to play Sablezard, so I do rate the deck fairly highly than others. Again, I still think Turbo Lost Box is just better. Probably C tier. It's like fine. It's like Tina. It's like I just play Turbo Lost Box Pikachu instead. But Sablezard actually isn't even that bad. I mean, you do pick up some decent matchups right now in the meta, which actually is a really good thing for the deck. You're probably weaker into Dragapult though than Turbo Lost Boxes. I guess that's a reason not to play the deck. Or maybe you're better because Sablezard can play like Monkey Dory and stuff. I don't know. It actually doesn't seem like a bad deck right now, in all honesty. Miraidon, obviously this deck did do really good in Merida. I'm going to put it at the top of A tier. I don't think Miraidon is quite the BDIF. I actually don't even think Miraidon is going to do as well at EUIC. I think the thing with Miraidon for Merida is that it was a good deck for that tournament specifically. And after Merida, I think the deck is going to fall off a little bit. I think we're going to see a lot more Miraidon hate for EUIC, like stuff like Archaladon and Raging Bolt are going to be more popular. And like I said, you don't even have the greatest matchup into Dragapult. Like, it's not as winnable as you might think. Still, though, Miraidon still feels like a top of A-tier type deck. You're still, like, bullying some of these decks. And it's still a deck where it's like, you can still make it for your opponent has to do something about that turn 2 Iron Hands, or else the game literally ends on the spot almost. But it definitely feels like the Miraidon hate is going to be a lot more prevalent this weekend, which is, in my opinion, what holds the deck back from being in the BDIF status. It was a really good deck for Merida. I think it's definitely a lot weaker for EUIC, though. And post EUIC, generally, Miraidon could be a B tier deck, or even, maybe not C tier, but B tier is probably going to be where Miraidon goes after EUIC. I do think the deck will be popular just because of the hype of Merida and stuff, but I don't think the deck is as well positioned for UIC as it was for Merida. Guardy, BIF, the top 2 decks right now are Guardy and Dragapult, no debate. They're really strong plays. Gardevoir definitely is debatably better than Dragapult. I think there's an argument to be made there. A lot of people will argue that, but I think they're just undeniably the 2 best decks right now. Guardy will be less popular than Dragapult, but Gardevoir will still be relevant. It'll still see a lot of play. Like, it's not going to be as popular as Dragapult. It'll probably be in the top 5 most played decks, maybe number 4 or 5. I'll talk about that, eventually in my meta prediction video, but Guardy definitely feels like it's really good right now. Really depends on how you want to build your list. That's kind of one of the scary things about Gardevoir right now, is that there's a lot of ways you can build it. There's the Drifloon Bravery package, the Hero's Cape build we saw from Merida, Secret Box, stuff like that. Unfair Stamp still is good. Like, we'll have to see where Guardy goes in EUIC and what build sees most amount of play. It's definitely a scary archetype for sure, but definitely BDIF for sure. Definitely in that like top tier, one of the best decks in the format right now type of status. Next up is Lugia. So, yeah, Lugia did flop at Merida quite a bit. It was a very well-positioned deck for that tournament. It got a lot of hype, and then Miraidon came in and just stole the show. So Lugia probably is weaker for EUIC. I'm still going to put in A tier, though, because it is Lugia at the end of the day. It's still a great deck, and I think Miraidon will see still a decent amount of play in EUIC, which is bad for Lugia, but I don't think Miraidon is as well positioned. So what I'm trying to say is all the good players who played Miraidon are probably going to switch over to a different deck for UIC, which is a good thing for the deck. More average, newer players might just play Miraidon, and I don't know, like, Lugia's fine. I think if you're somebody who wanted to play Lugia at Merida and didn't do as well at Merida, or maybe you wanted to play Lugia to EUIC and wanted Lugia to flop at Merida, and they kind of maybe got scared of the Miraidon winning, I still think Lugia is a fine play for UIC. I think A tier is still a good place to put it. I think it's still a good deck right now. Miraidon being popular is bad for the deck, but I don't think Miraidon is well positioned for UIC, which is a good thing for Lugia. It feels like it's going to go up and down in that kind of regards, right? Next up is Goldengo. I think Goldengo's a B tier deck, just kind of like the other decks here. It seems okay. In my opinion, Goldengo's pretty good into Dragapult. Miraidon's not a bad matchup either. Archaladon and Raging Bolt are free matchups. Lost Box is an abysmal matchup. Lugia is 50-50. They play 2 Cinccino, it's unfavored. 1 Cinccino, it's favored, or 50, or it's slightly favored. But yeah, Goldengo's a fine deck right now. If we're going to see more of these like turbo big basic decks be more popular, that's a good thing for Goldengo. Goldengo, yeah, feels like a decent B tier pick. Also, the Guardy matchup is 50-50. Really depends on how the Gardevoir deck is being built, but Goldengo definitely feels like it's a 50-50 matchup into Gardevoir. If Gardevoir doesn't play Manaphy, it's very good for Goldengo. I guess you could theoretically build either Togekiss or Palkia Goldengo, depending on which one you think is better. But yeah, Goldengo I think is a B tier pick, B tier pick right now for sure. Yeah, nothing really crazy about the deck. Just B tier for sure. Pretty solid deck. Has some good matchups. The one thing that scares me about the deck is obviously Lost Box being popular is not great for the deck. That's a bad matchup. But everything else is okay. Like I said, Lugia's like 50-50. If they play double Cinccino, it can be unfavored. Next up is Palkia variants. Just because we haven't really seen these decks do well recently, I'm going to probably put Palkia Noctowl in D tier. If I was to play a Palkia deck this weekend, I'd probably rather just play Palk Dusk because you can kind of play more into that like Budu Dusknoir angle as opposed to Palkia Noctowl, which gets a lot weaker because of Budu. So yeah, I don't think Palkia Noctowl is like a great deck right now. It's like okay. I don't know. D tier might be a little bit too harsh for the deck, but if I was going to play Palkia deck, I would rather just play Palkia Dusknoir, in my opinion. Even that doesn't even feel great right now, but maybe it is. Maybe I'm underrating the deck. Control. I mean, I'm not really somebody who plays a lot of Control. I think Control and Stall are both like B tier picks right now. They're not terrible decks. I will say Snorlax's hate is less popular right now. Less decks are respecting Snorlax, which is a good thing. Guardy playing double Turo and potentially Spiritomb is not a good thing. Dragapult plays really one Turo, which is like pretty good for Snorlax, right? So Snorlax is fine. Control and Snorlax are both pretty good B tier picks. I actually do expect these decks will see more play this weekend, just because it is an international and more players like to play these type of decks do go to these tournaments more commonly. So it's still a deck to look out for. Debatable if you want to respect it, obviously. It's not going to be popular enough to respect, but still a deck. If you go far in the tournament, good chance you'll hit one. Next up is Moon. Turbo Moon, C tier. I feel like it's just the worst turbo deck. Like, you're not really good into Miraidon or Raging Bolt. Also, you're pretty bad into Dragapult. I guess the only good thing about Turbo Moon is your Guardy matchup is decent, but even then, I don't even think it's that great. I think Moon is like a fine C tier deck. It just feels like the worst turbo deck you can build and play right now. Like, I'd rather literally just play Raging Bolt, because I would rather beat Dragapult more than Gardevoir, and even then, Moon doesn't even beat Gardevoir that much. This is probably C tier for sure. It's like fine. Gouging Fire, I'd probably put that in B tier. I don't know, like, I'm not the one who plays the deck a lot. I like it. I think it's decent. It did well. I don't think Gouging Fire's play rate is going to, like, go up by that much after Merida, but it's a cool deck. Still not bad in Dragapult. Miraidon theoretically should be a good matchup. Archaludon and Raging Bolt being a little bit more popular this weekend might be good for the deck also, though then you have to compete with stuff like Lost Box and Lugia, and that's maybe worth... Well, I guess Lugia is actually a good matchup, but I don't know. Gouging Fire is like a fine deck. I would definitely slot it in B tier for sure. It's like decent. Next up is Ceruledge. I actually really like Ceruledge right now. I think I did a video on it actually recently. Ceruledge is actually pretty decent. The problem is, though, it feels like a worse Goldengo. I mean, I don't know. I'll put it in B tier, I guess. I'll be kind. I'll put it in B tier. I like the deck. I've been enjoying playing it a lot recently, but I'm not convinced on the deck quite yet. I guess we just don't have like a good 60 for the deck quite yet. That's maybe the issue. I think the deck's cool, though. I think it's definitely strong, but I don't know. It feels like Goldengo's a better deck at doing what it's supposed to do, if that makes any sense. All right. Last two relevant decks in the tier list. We got Tropicos and Quad Thorns. Dusknoir Tropicos, I would definitely put in C tier. Much like Charizard, it's fallen off. It relies a little bit too heavily on Rare Candy, and you don't have a good Dragable matchup. That's why I think Tropicos, Dusknoir's got to go in C tier. This deck, I feel like, is just a lot weaker right now. Very mediocre. Yeah, I think the best Tropicos variant is just Cloth. Cloth is a better Tropicos deck than Tropicos Dusknoir is right now. Finally is Quad Thorns. B tier? C tier? One of the two? I mean, it's free winning against Lugia, it's pretty good. But, like, you look at Quad Thorns, it's like, is it even beating Dragapult or Gardevoir? It's beating Gardevoir. Depending on how Gardevoir builds their list right now, it's maybe beating Gardevoir. They're not playing Klefki, I guess, and Flutter. It's pretty good. You beat Archaludon pretty convincingly. Raging Bull matchup's unfavored, I guess. Lost Box is slightly unfavored. Miraidon's an okay matchup. Dragapult, but that's the thing. Does this deck even beat Dragapult? I don't even think it does. I don't know. I'm going to put it, like, mid-C tier. It's, like, fine. I don't know. It's actually, yeah, C tier probably is where I put it. I don't think it's going to be popular. Is it better than Pult Thorns is actually the main question we want to be asking. Probably better than Bullthorns. I don't know. It's like fine. It's a little bit more disruptive than that deck, which I think is a better advantage. But I don't know. It really depends on how Guardy lists are being built right now. If Guardy's playing answers to Thorns, it's bad. If I don't know. I don't even know if it beats Dragapult. I don't even think it does beat Dragapult, to be honest with you. But yeah, Quad Thorns C tier seems fine. But yeah, there you go. That is my tier list for EUIC, where I think the meta is right now headed into this weekend. Pretty excited for the tournament myself. I cannot wait to compete this weekend and explore and check out London, England. And yeah, let me know anything on my tier list down below in the comment section. Did I overrank or underrank any cards? Let me know in the comments. And hope to see some of y'all at EUIC this weekend. I'll have some more EUIC content going out later this week. Definitely stay tuned for that. And I'll catch y'all later. Bye-bye.